in the gospel today, we have a tale of two miracles. One of Jesus walking on the water, and then one of Peter walking on the water after Jesus. And it's an interesting tale because we have this scene of danger and darkness and a storm and the disciples in that boat frightened, and then Jesus comes. And they don't think, oh, it's Jesus. They think, oh, it's a ghost. So again, we have more of that fear. And then Peter, bless Peter, of all the disciples, is the one who calls out to Jesus and said, Lord, if it is you, call to me to come to you. And Jesus does. And amazingly, Peter does exactly what Jesus asked him to do. And you have to imagine how terrifying this is, because Jesus isn't asking him to walk on a placid lake. He's not asking him to walk on steady ground. He's asking him to step from the safety of a boat into the raging waters of a storm, and to trust that he will be able to walk through that storm. That's a huge risk. And yet Peter does it. He gets out of the safety of the boat and walks into that storm. And as he walks, he doesn't necessarily pay attention to the storm in the beginning. He fixes his eyes on Jesus' promise, on his call. And so he walks toward Jesus. But in the middle, he notices the storm. Because no matter how much Jesus calls, no matter how much Jesus is right there in front of him, it's hard not to notice a storm when it's surrounding you. It's hard not to notice a storm when it's raging around you. It's hard not to notice the waves, the wind, the boat behind you, Jesus in front of you, and to realize in that moment that you are nowhere safe. You are in the middle of a raging storm. Safety is behind you, safety in front of you, but where you are is nowhere safe. And in that moment, Peter sinks. Because in that moment, his focus is what is on around him. Now, what happens next can be interpreted in two different ways. Often, there's a thread of interpreting the story that puts the blame on Peter, that says, oh, if he just kept his eyes on Jesus, he would have gone to Jesus and been fine. And sometimes you can even hear it in the words of Jesus, can be interpreted as critique. Oh, ye of little faith. Why didn't you believe? That's one way to read the story. But if it were true that what we do and how we react in the moment of the storm depends only on our faith, then where is God in all that? What point is it to believe in God? Because we would be able to walk all by ourselves. Jesus calls us, we walk. What's the problem? But that's not how life works. That's not how faith works. That's not how discipleship works. The truth is, in the middle of the storm, it is impossible to ignore the waves. It is incredibly difficult to keep your eyes on Jesus. It's incredibly easy to sink. But this gospel tells us something different from the blaming voices that we can sometimes hear. Because what Jesus does in that moment when he sees Peter sink, before he says anything to Peter, is he reaches out his hand. Peter, sinking in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the depth of danger and chaos, in the middle of a dangerous sea, Jesus reaches out to him. I love the image of Jesus' hand coming through the water as Peter is flailing. We don't know if Peter knows how to swim. And even if he does know how to swim, you're in the middle of the storm. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? The boat is too far behind you. Who knows where Jesus is? Well, the truth is Jesus is right there, right with Peter, saw him sink, and didn't meet that with condemnation. Didn't say, well, it was your fault, Peter. You didn't look. You didn't believe enough. Therefore, you're just going to drown. Jesus reaches out. And that tells us where Jesus is in the storms of our lives. Right there with us, holding out his hand and waiting for us to grab onto it. I always imagine that when Jesus says, "O ye little faith," and maybe it's me, and who knows how Jesus actually said this, I always imagine it as chiding. "You little faith, wow, why didn't you believe me? I'm right here." It is the words of someone who loves Peter, who knows what's best for Peter, who cares for Peter, and who is there when Peter most needs him. And this is the story, I think, not only of Peter, but of our own lives, of how we are called to believe in Jesus' words, to step out of the boat into places where we may not be as secure, where there might be storms, and there are difficult places, and where safety has been left behind, and we're in the middle of a raging lake. We are called to step out into that, to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus as best we can. But the good news is that our ability to reach Jesus doesn't depend on us, doesn't depend on how much we believe no matter what. Now, that doesn't mean that we have no part in this. Peter had to step out of the boat. He had to make the first step. But not everything depended on him. In that moment of greatest need, when the waves were going over his head, when he sank because for a moment he looked around and thought, "Oh, this is not good. I'm in the middle of a storm," Jesus reaches out. And as Jesus reaches out to Peter, so Jesus reaches out to us. So as we go into this next week, this next month, this next season, may we know in our hearts that no matter where we are, that we are called to step out of the safety of that boat, that we are called to go towards Jesus, to live our lives in fidelity to our faith, in belief of Jesus' promise. But even as we step out into the storm, no matter how much the storm rages, no matter how big the waves are, no matter how much the wind blows, that Jesus is there. And if we should fall, we will not be met with condemnation, but with Jesus' outstretched hand, ready to save us. Blessed be the name of the Lord.